starting off well. Thank you. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about UCL East as a campus. I know some of you managed to come on the tours with me yesterday. If you didn't get a tour and you want one, come up to me after the end of the sessions today, and I can give you a quick tour. It might not be the hour tour, but I can give you a quick tour. So I'm going to talk a little bit about UCL East as a campus. I'll focus on what I consider to be a really key part of my job role at UCL, and one where I hope I kind of bring value to the institution and our end users, and how we kind of approach user requirements, user scope, user narrative, those sorts of things. And then I'll have a look at hopefully some interesting examples from UCL East, somewhere the process went really well, somewhere the process went less well, and just give you some of the lessons that I've learned along the way. Not a huge amount, but it might help you in your own AV journeys with your end users. So this is quite an old slide because obviously the monolith that we're actually sitting in isn't here yet. But I've kept it in here as for me, this slide represents my journey at UCL and at UCL East in particular. So I started at UCL in September 2019. I also, about 3 months later in December, went through with a pre-planned move to East London. So I managed to, the building's here, and I managed to basically live here, or here kind of thing. So I debate between whether it is a blessing or a curse moving quite this close to UCL East. But events like today remind me that it is in fact a blessing because it's such an amazing building and it's a real joy showing it off to you. My lovely director sitting at the back there, Lloyd, basically when I joined, we had a really clear steer, all of us had a really clear steer from the director that the ISD relationship with estates was somewhat fractious. There were things to be said on both sides. It wasn't in the right place, and we really needed to build some bridges because UCL East could not fail. It was the single biggest investment that UCL's made in its campus in, I'm not sure, ever, maybe Jill, maybe ever, I don't know, we've got Canada Square. So yeah, it was a huge investment and it just could not fail. And I think actually the fact that it needed to be a success and that it could not fail was really good for us because in working with the States, we had a common goal. And there's nothing that reunites fractious relationships better than a common goal, in my opinion. So I was also working with a really amazing team. So he's not here today, but I've got an amazing ISD PM that worked on this project called Reese Edel. And the UCL East project team was kind of newly formed for UCL East. So we've got a really amazing team in terms of Helen Fisher, Catherine Fletcher, our more recently joined ISD director, Rob Webb, who you'll be hearing from tomorrow about the kind of shared facilities a little bit more. And our amazing provost, Professor Paola Lettieri, our pro-provost actually for UCL East. She's amazing. She's a professor of chemical engineering, but also one of those really decisive stakeholders. If you ask her something, you give her options, she'll pick one and you know how to go away. So it felt like it was a real good project to start kind of turning the corner on our relationship with the States. So just to say really quickly, final one about the campuses or the campi. It's all about, and particularly Marshgate, is all about bringing together the different faculties to design courses for the next 10 years. So we only moved across, I think, maybe 2 or 3 courses from Bloomsbury. And even then it was kind of putting together media teaching courses under one umbrella. So it's all about kind of creating courses that are new, that are for the future, and that students and staff and society are going to need in the next 10, 15, 20, 100 years. If we get another 100 years, we hope so. So I'm just going to go back to the AV technical design and delivery process that we did. And apologies for the text-heavy slide, but I think it's worth just talking about the process that we follow. So as soon as I joined UCL, we were straight into designs, basically M&E designs. And I always think, I know it's debatable with AV over IP now, but I always think if you want a really future-proof building, put data in places you're going to need it, put floor boxes in places you're going to need to pull cables through, and get the cables pulled through. And that's really important to get right. So our standard process, which we pretty much followed at UCL East, is to meet with the main end users and main building occupiers. They're not always the same people. Your teaching staff aren't always the same people as the people occupying the building. And it's always challenging when you go into a space where you're meeting with the head of school, maybe, rather than the actual teachers, but trying to find the right end users is really key. We then write up a high-level AV narrative to ensure we know what we're trying to achieve with the AV systems. We might send that to the end users at that point, or we might wait until we've been through the building a little bit better. We then get the CAD designs from the main contractor for the buildings and rooms that we're working on. So my high-level AV narrative, I'll give that to one of my designers to work through the AVM designs. And we'll try and proceed with those as early as possible. So if we're lucky, we'll get plans in CAD and RCPs, and we might get a confirmed ceiling height. And if we're really, really lucky, we'll get an elevation, but most of the time we draw that ourselves. And then I go back and I update the AV narrative with compromises we've had to make, because we end up making an awful lot of compromises, and you'll see some of those from the examples here today. And then we issue the AV narrative and relevant designs and bits and pieces to the end users, hopefully so that they can agree, which will save you a lot of bother in the end. So some of my kind of key things I'd say about user requirements gathering is get the right end users in the room, as I've said, have some key questions and ideas to bring. People generally find it much easier to comment on something that's in front of them or an idea you've presented them with than just a blank piece of paper. Start with key items the AV system needs to deliver. I always ask kind of what are the 1 or 2 key things. It's usually plug in my laptop and get teaching quickly. Playback, listen in bold. Sorry, I'm reading out my slides all over the place, but really listen and play back. Sometimes I've actually completely got the wrong end of the stick and they'll go, no, I meant this. I'd also say if you can design for your 90% of mainstream users, it's going to stop them giving service calls to my lovely colleague Ketan. And don't be afraid to say what the system can't deliver. At the end of the day, if somebody's got 5 grand and they want a 30 grand system, you're going to have to say to them, it's not going to do that, but we can do this. And if you can meet 80% of the requirement, you're probably in about the right place. Anything else on that? Sorry, 1 second. Yeah, get sign off. Get them to agree. Send it to somebody important and make sure they've emailed you back and said yes, because that will help you out in 18, 20, 24 months' time, maybe 36 months' time, when somebody else is in their job. So just get that agreement somehow. I tend to judge how successful my AV narratives have been by how many I have to send out at the end of a project. And I'm only on 3 across the whole of UCL. So I think that's not too bad. The other thing, this is just a slightly bigger picture thing when you think about user requirements and a narrative. We're used to looking at plans. Generally, we'll look at plans and we'll be like, oh, okay, it's 7 meters, the ceiling's 2.7, bloody-blah, there's a window at the back. We're used to doing that. It makes sense to us. Most people aren't. They cannot envisage a space. So if you've got similar spaces of a similar size or a similar functionality and you can show them pictures, that's a really good way of communicating what you want, and it stops those very impractical decisions of, I don't know, I want something in the middle of the space and then people are endlessly kind of walking around it. Be aware of the bigger picture at your institution. If there's a big change coming, I don't know, Microsoft Teams rooms to Zoom team rooms, buy products where you can update the firmware and move it across so they haven't wasted lots of money. Consider what your management might be thinking about and the wider building and the campus decisions that might have an impact. Consider what else is in the building. UCL is really good at doing up a few classrooms or sometimes floors in a building. So we'll occasionally, as you'll see from Ketan's presentation, we're getting rid of the old UI gradually or mostly. But occasionally you'll get users that are going from, you know, a room that hasn't been updated for 8 years and the old UI that looks quite different, and then you're giving them a shiny new thing. And it's quite a big cognitive load to go from there to there and understand what the systems are doing. So it's really important to think about what the rest of the building is. And again, don't be afraid to say what it isn't going to do, because it's better to have that conversation up front than have a disappointed end user that is forever disappointed in what you've delivered to them. So just going to focus on a couple of spaces, 1 space in Paul Street and a couple here, and then I'll hand over to Ketan. So UCL's Paul Street, which is the kind of building with the fans, we didn't really have time to show it to you that well, but I can do a tour again. So we've got 5 standardized teaching spaces. This is one of them. This actually started off as a standard teaching space. Then we added PCs. Then we've added screens for group work. So it's got 1 cinema space and 3 major kind of lab department type spaces. And we've got 8 meeting rooms, 4 MTR, 4 VT, BYOD type spaces. One of the key things for me, Paul Street opened a year before Marshgate. So there was a lot of, we don't have that functionality in Paul Street because it's coming in Marshgate. And what we all kind of forgot, certainly me, was that people will still want to do those activities. Just because there isn't a room available doesn't mean they don't need to do something. So one of the key examples for me was large meetings. the biggest meeting room over there seats 6 people. And there was this real need to have large meetings, particularly as some people had moved from Bloomsbury across to here. So I would have adapted a teaching space by adding a second camera and making sure that it could do, you know, Teams meetings really easily. It can do Teams meetings, but the camera's in effectively the wrong place if there's lots of you. So in hindsight, I would have done that bigger picture, campus picture and functionality requirement a little bit better. So this is our cinema space. And when I say it's a cinema, it is actually a cinema. There's 2 35mm projectors. There's a massive reel. I think there's a 16mm projector somewhere as well. That bit's not really mine. But my kit is all kind of in a plant room somewhere. And in hindsight, there was a lot of negotiation for this user journey. So we had one particular user that kind of designed the space to suit his own needs, which is fine. But actually, the question I should have asked is, how often are you really using this as a cinema venue? And how often is UCL going to be using this as a teaching space? Because the answer to that would have been almost 95% teaching, maybe 5% cinema. So I really should have asked more questions and been a bit more stern about the need for the teaching space to work really, really well and not be a constant compromise. It works okay, but put it this way, we've added some greater hybrid for events and stuff like that as well. So I would have thought, what's going to be the usage when people actually occupy the space? We've added the hybrid stuff. I also would have pushed for power to all the seats. That didn't happen. I should have been a bit more involved in that. But it is a really amazing space. UCL don't have very many spaces like this. And for once, the seats are really comfortable. So yeah, it's got that going for it. So going on to Marshgate, I tried to do a nice table of all the spaces, but I actually had them in my head, so I just typed them out. So 32 standard central teaching spaces, and they are pretty much standardized, as some of you will have seen from the talk. Kind of debatable whether we should have gone flat screens and stuff, but actually every lecturer walks into the room, they know what they're getting, all the rooms work the same. And I think, Ketan will back me up, the support calls have been reasonably low in the building, but it's not fully occupied. 2 shared lab teaching spaces, which I'm going to go into in a bit more detail, standard meeting rooms, boardrooms, all the things. And here's a little slide. I'm sorry about this slide because it is horrible, but it's a good lesson for me in keep an eye on things. My computer wants to go. So this is lecture theatre 118, where you'll be tomorrow. It looks a lot better now, don't worry. But in here, I kept seeing on the drawings from the main contractor this sort of podium thing, and it didn't arrive, and it didn't arrive, and I thought, you don't need to worry about it. And then about 3 days before we were due to install the whole lecture theatre, there was this massive podium that was meant to be, a removable podium. We did remove it, never put it back. It's never been asked for. So I think my lesson here is, it's almost like that train thing where they go, if you see something that doesn't look right, shout. I should have shouted about that because it was just a horrible surprise one Monday morning. So keep an eye on drawings. Go back and look at your building models if you've got access to your main kind of BIM model. It was okay in the end. So I'm just going to show you a lovely picture of how it is now. And you'll, like I say, you'll be there tomorrow getting a presentation from our UCL ISD director. We managed to, because it was kind of later in the project, we did manage to add additional hybrid functionality with the audience tracking, and it's used a lot for events as well. So yeah, it ended up being a success, but keep an eye on the drawings. 712, also a success. I'm sorry to show this terrible picture, but it demonstrates well what we wanted. So originally in 712, they were going to put a monitor screen for every 2 students. And the academics kind of came to this space, and our lovely lab manager had started, and she did these cardboard cutouts of what it would look like in the whole space on the first bench. And the academics said, no, we don't want screens everywhere. We actually would like to see our students, which is quite a reasonable request. So we had to go in about June, we had to go back to the drawing board and re-look at this whole space based on academic feedback. So what we ended up doing we ended up doing an options paper that went off to our UCL East project team with a couple of options on it. And that was, I'm afraid, the best way that I could find to show where the screens were going. So yeah, it worked. It worked, even if it doesn't look amazing. So yeah, we ended up in the wet lab space. We ended up putting back-to-back screens. We could only fit 49-inch screens in points at the end because could only get hold of the blue stream at the time. So they just auto switch, so each bench can be used individually. And then, yeah, we've got our kind of front teaching space with a big screen. We've also got zoned audio throughout. So the zoned audio didn't really change. We had to adapt it a little bit with the ceiling design. So the zoned audio didn't change. But yeah, we had really involved end users, you know, it was in their kind of wish to change this design. So the end users were really involved. They were very happy with the space as well. I think the lab manager was saying they've had Imperial in recently, they've had an American uni. So yeah, having that kind of options paper and the interaction was really key. Also, there's about 42 Crestron DM NVX 360s knocking around. So, you know, yours for a reasonable cost if you need them. Trying to get some project back. The DryLab 500, I'll be honest, you'll see in the next slide, it's still a bit of an ongoing work in progress. So the DryLab 500, this was the original elevation. I came in one day and they'd moved this door here and they'd moved my projection screen here. So that all of my benches here pretty much couldn't see anything. It was kind of useless at that point. Again, we had zoned audio, which works fine. But this is still a bit of an interim work in progress. So if you came on the tour, you might have got in here and seen that we've got these screens. The lab manager just ended up running very long HDMI cables, and then he wonders why they don't work all the time. But we're coming back here and we're going to kind of put screens at each bench and just make it function kind of a bit better for the space. So I think it's important to just be flexible sometimes as well. You may not be able to fix it all on day one, but as long as you're coming back and fixing it as best as you can, it's probably fine. And then nearly there. And then I've just put up the academic common room, which you're all going to get to experience because it's where we're having drinks later, because I think it's one of my favourite spaces. We put in some really good speakers. And I think it's just a nice design. We managed to get the speakers the right sort of colour for the wall. We went back to the project team and said, do you want them spray painted the same colour as the wall? Do you want them black? Black, fine. But it's just nice. The technology's there. It supports the space really nicely, but it's not intrusive. And I think that's really important. Sometimes AV can be a bit overpowering. And just while I'm here, I want to call out my amazing colleagues, Chris, Dan Gritzman's in the other session, and Chris Knapp, and they were just amazing at helping us get the building signed off. So it definitely wasn't just me. That's it. Any questions? Go on.
Slide that had the 8 buttons, right? It's about the process.
Yeah.
The first one was, I think you said, main occupied users.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just wondered, does that include students? Or did you have a conversation about including students in that, or are we just talking about teaching staff and we're talking about end users? So
for UCL specifically, I'll just go back to the slide really quickly so you can understand what I'm waffling about. For UCL particularly, the UCL East project team was getting feedback from students and stuff like that. And also our student populace is kind of new here because it's new courses. So we are continuously getting feedback from students, but on Marshgate particularly, it was more speaking to the academics teaching in the spaces, speaking to the building occupiers. But I'm lucky here. We had that UCL East project team, and Catherine Fletcher is amazing because she had a really clear idea about how she wanted all the spaces to function and who would be occupying which bits of the building. So I was very lucky. I had a very clear steer on that one. Does that somewhat answer your question?
I just wondered how valuable maybe you thought that feedback was. Is it, I mean,
hugely valuable.
So they're asking things that actually practically you can deliver.
Hugely valuable. You know, even things like I've got dual projection spaces and I'd be going, are you sure you don't want the lectern in the middle? No, we want it to the side because we want people to come out and teach and engage with their students. And just that clear steer just helped me either know that what I was doing was right or know that I had to go back to the drawing board and have another little think and maybe present some other options. Any other questions? Hello. Hi. Yeah. So originally, the brief that I was given was that it needed to be group collaboration spaces. It could be 2 separate spaces or it could be used as one. And in that doorway, that was where your mentor in the center was going to be teaching, you know, with a clicker and stuff like that. That was obviously designed even before I arrived, so over 5 years ago. In reality, after the pandemic, the use has massively changed. and mostly Global Business School for Health are in that space. So I'm going to be completely honest, we're going to take the wall down soon and just make it one large teaching space. But it was designed as a group active learning space, so you could plug in locally, you could teach in the centre, and it was going to be this kind of, you know, where you set practical challenges, like City used to do, like a Millcaster set of challenges where you kind of work on a town and stuff like that. So that was the original thing that it was designed for, but yeah, the actual usage has been a bit different. Yeah, yeah. The feedback is we need to fit 60 students in there in one room. How do we take the wall down? If I'm absolutely honest, which is what we were doing in July. So yeah, it was a nice idea, but yeah, it just didn't come to fruition in the end. Hiya.
Once the AV design was that then handed over to the sort of principal contractor to do their work?
No, we delivered it. So the principal contractor did all my network and power. They put in all the containment. The cables being pulled through, you know, I mentioned cable schedules, the cables being pulled through, that was actually done by then one of our networking contractors, because it was kind of not quite in anyone's package. And then the AV integrator came in and did everything and, you know, terminated the cables and got everything kind of working. I did add in our tender to the AV integrator that they could come to site for 2 weeks and have a look around all the AV M&E and make sure it's all going to work and flag any issues before PC. So yeah, we kind of built in some safety measures in the contract. But yeah. Any more? Brilliant. I'll hand over to Sam. Oh yeah. Oh, sorry.
You were saying that your AV contractor came in after practical completion. Was there any discussions due to the escalation of project delays, etc., that might be considered to bring them prior to practical completion? So is that something you considered or did? Or?
Yeah, that was why we got our network cabling contractor to pull all the cables through, was because they effectively could do all the health and safety stuff and sit under MACE. In reality, they actually did come in, our integrator did come in a bit before and do that walk around the building and stuff. So that had like a sort of 4-week period where if there was anything major missing that meant the installations could not go ahead, I paid them to flag it. So they didn't always, but then they had to deal with it themselves, right? So yeah. Okay.
The misfortune of traveling by the tube 3-4 times a week, and normally it's quite a boring, quite a mundane sort of commute.
Except on those days when you are walking through the station and you get to see a notice board with the quote of the day. And they are incredible, right? They're enlightening, they're refreshing. And last week, I was walking through Euston Square and I came across one of those quotes. And I liked it so much that I thought, you know what, I'm going to start the presentation today with that quote. So the quote goes, "The human brain is an amazing organ. It starts when you wake up and it stops when you get into the office." So if I make any mistakes today, you know why. I joined UCL about 6 years ago. And in that 6 years, what I haven't done is stand in front of you and done a presentation. Now, I suppose there's a reason for that. I believe that anybody who stands on a stage like this needs to have a good story to tell. I just didn't think we had one. But doesn't mean we weren't busy writing one. We absolutely were. Over the last 6 years, we have been incredibly busy trying to write that AV story for UCL. We know how it ends. We have done about 60% of the journey now. We think we have good enough material to present to you part 1. And hopefully the sequel will arrive in about 3 years' time. So in sort of this true, complex storytelling, movie making style, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you how it's going to end. Then we're going to do some flashback and work our way up to present day. So how it ends? Well, it ends when we start providing our staff and students with spaces that are exciting, that are inspirational, right? Spaces that just work. Spaces where we've got technology in there that allows us to explore different pedagogical needs, right? It's a very customer-centric view of the world. I'm not talking about any tech here. I'm not talking about AV over IP. I'm not talking about camera tracking. And the reason we do that is because when we are looking around at all this nice, new, shiny tech, we sometimes tend to forget why we are doing all of this, right? It's for them, it's for the staff, and it's for the students. But we are not there yet. So how did it all start? I think it started in October 2017. That's when I first walked into UCL. And I was faced with a structure that didn't really make a lot of sense to me. We had a central AV team that looked after all the central AV spaces. We had an AV team for medical sciences that looked after different set of spaces. We had an AV team for our Institute of Education that again looked after different spaces. We then had an AV team for our Laws and Humanities department. Then we had a central AV design team. That design team would design all the spaces which were within the remit of central AV. They might or might not design the spaces for medical sciences. Again, the same for IOE. They might or might not do the spaces for IOE. And the same with Flash. So as you can see, quite a jumbled up sort of structure. But that sort of a structure is not unusual for an organization like UCL, right? UCL has grown organically over 198 years. Small departments came together, became a big university. This was bound to happen. So what we had was different AV teams for different departments. We had a central design team that did not own all the designs. The amount of people who were involved in the strategic decision making was pretty much in double digits. We had some teams that were quite future looking, some not so much. And we haven't even talked about IT, right? So we had a networks team that sat outside the AV landscape. We had a desktop team that sat outside the AV landscape. And then we had our backend infrastructure team. So think from a project manager perspective. If there's a project manager who has to deliver a building that's going to be used by many departments with many teaching spaces, they are going to have to go and talk to all of these teams individually, collaborate, coordinate, and then somehow deliver the project. And that's just not efficient. There are other issues with the federated model. So we had 2 different interfaces. In fact, these are just the 2. We had many. Right? One of them looks like it was designed in the 1980s. One fairly sort of modern looking, but still not accessibility friendly. We had different schematics and rec design. We had different support provisions. We had different standards. We basically had different variations of the same service. Now, put yourself in a teacher's shoe. Right? You are in a class. You have done the teaching. You walk out. You go to the building next door into another class, and you might have a very, very different experience. So it wasn't what you would call a unifying UCL experience. It was more like reinforcing that local departmental thinking. So what did we do? Well, we needed to consolidate our AV into one place. And the most likely target for that was the central AV team. But we had a central AV team that wasn't really performing as well as it should do. So me, along with one of my colleagues, Stephen Ellis, we sort of set about working on that. We started looking at it from the ground up, put in really good processes in place, set some really good foundations. It took us about a year. We brought the people along on the journey. It was about a year at which point we felt, we are proud of the service we provide now. So the team got strengthened. Next, we had to figure out a way of bringing AV and IT together. Now, that was a bit more simpler for us because my boss was sitting right there, Lloyd. He owned the customer operations stack, and that stack essentially had the networks, desktop, and central AV. So we looked at how we reorganize ourselves, and we basically blew up those 3 teams and created brand new 3 teams out of it. So the way we did it was we had our technical operations team. Now, this is probably the most resource-intensive team we have. It has a combination of desktop engineers, audio-visual engineers, and network engineers. They tend to deal with all the day-to-day incidents and requests. We have a specialist team. Again, you have an audio-visual specialist, a network specialist, desktop specialist, and they look after complex escalations, problem records, innovation, R&D. And then we have a central design and delivery team, right? And they look after minor projects, capital projects like UCL East, our annual space refresh, all of those things. We also set up some very fluid communication channels. So the design delivery and the specialists, they talk to each other all the time. Same with specialists and ops. In fact, specialists and ops have this weekly formal meeting where they all get together and discuss the issues of the day. Between tech ops and design, it's sort of a bit more ad hoc. They don't really need to talk to each other that much because we have got this pretty good chain of command where, design talk to specialist to ops, ops to specialist to design. It sort of flows quite nicely. But what that did was it allowed us to centralize AV ops, innovation, and design. Once we had this model in place and it's sort of bedded in, that's when we went out to the other AV departments and said, look, this is working really well for us. Let's come together. And we were successful in getting that message across. So we were then able to bring all the AV teams into this singular structure that we had. Now, we started working on our common design standards, right? We started working on our common service model. Once we had done that, we then had to pick up the next big thing. How do we unify our interfaces? Right? Now, we wanted to do this a long time ago, but we actually hit a very unexpected roadblock. We had a senior leader who loved what we were about to say here, right? They loved the idea of that unified interface, the modern interface. The challenge to us was, I will only say yes if you can guarantee you're going to transition from the old interface to the new interface over a weekend. Right? That's pretty much impossible to do, right? So it sort of put us back a bit. But we still continued working in the background. We had a UX consultant we brought in. This consultant had worked on the gov.uk website. They created some frames for us. And using those frames, we then finalized our design. We worked with digital education. We worked with the digital accessibility team, making sure that it was accessible for everyone. And we finalized our designs. And that's when COVID hit us. And that's where we got our opportunity, right? Because nobody was on campus. That was the time when we can implement this large-scale change. But the more we started looking into it, the more we realized that actually there was more work needed here because we didn't have the common set of standards, right? We had different things happening in different spaces. So we had to try and bring all of the standardization into this piece of work. So this project became essentially a 2 or 3 year project. We were also very keen that we did not want to do vendor-specific coding, right? We wanted to become vendor agnostic. So that's why we opted for C# and HTML5. And we onboarded Lucid Partnerships as our programming partner. And they've been working with us for about 2-3 years now, and they have done an exceptional job at putting our new UI together. So all in all, I think this and the common service model, they were absolutely key things for us to deliver first up. If you think about the new UI, I think we're about 90-95% there. We have got some outliers, and these are either incredibly complex spaces or spaces like UCL East. I mean, UCL East was a project in flight. We did not want to really delay the project just because we wanted to roll out a new UI. So that is sort of part of phase 2. And that we are aiming to sort of get finished in the next year or so. But 90-95% of spaces are done. So now from a teacher's perspective, they're in one class, they're teaching, they get an experience. They walk out, go to the building next door, teach another class, and they have the exact same experience, the same support structure, the same interfaces. For them, it's a unifying UCL experience. So what are we doing now? We are adopting agile ways of working. In fact, we have adopted agile ways of working. We started on this journey about 3 years ago, and it was quite difficult initially because AV is quite sequential, it's quite waterfall, doesn't really lend itself way to agile ways of working. But we had to find something that we can latch on to so we can then start making progress. And what we latched on to was the customer centricity piece, the idea that the customer is the center of everything we do. And then the idea was, why don't we take over those large deliverables, break them into smaller chunks, and present it to customers as a minimal viable product? They then have a chance to feed back to us, and if necessary, we can course correct. So we started doing that. Now, every quarter, we have 2 planning days. In fact, we just had one last week, Wednesday, Thursday, where all of us got together as a team. We spoke about the past, the present, the future, what our plans are for the next 3 months, engaged with Jill's team because they are running a big project right now. We had our estates colleagues who came in and spoke to us and, and told us about what their plans are so we can plan it in properly. And we have some very lively discussions. In fact, sometimes we have some pretty passionate discussions, right? But what ends up happening is those discussions, you always end up with a good result at the end of it. And I think that's what matters. We are now sort of fairly mature here. The diagram you see there is what you call our Miro board. So this is the work that we are planning over the next 3 months. It's sort of equal story points and it's got owners assigned to it. And I genuinely look forward to those 2 days every quarter because it's the chance for us to get together with our team, with our customers, and just talk about what's important for the next 3 months. And I think that has made a huge difference for us. Next, closer working with estates. I mean, you can see, right? These both are the same spaces, right? This is what you used to look before. That's after AV and estates went in together, refreshed the room and came out. I mean, the difference is night and day, right? But that's not what it always was. Previously, we would have us going in, refreshing AV and fabric not getting touched, or you would have estates going in, doing the fabric, but AV not getting touched. And from a staff and student perspective, the perception is still very, very poor, right? So we just wanted to make sure we are going to break away from that. And as Sheila said, right, the dictate was we had to get better at working together. So Lloyd and the powers to be said it, we sort of made it happen on the ground. My colleague from Estates Kiel couldn't be here today, unfortunately. Otherwise, I would have pointed her out. But we have got a great working relationship right now. And it's not always easy. There's always friction, right? But what we do is we try to find a common ground. Sometimes I have to compromise. Sometimes they will compromise. But at the heart of it, the objective is that we are doing this for UCL. It's not about ISD. It's not about estates. It's about UCL. And as long as we keep that thinking in our head, I think the relationship is just going to keep on thriving going forward. UCL East, I mean, Sheila just did a huge presentation. You are here today, right? It's an impressive building. Still, I think it could do with a lick of paint, but my manager will call me a Philistine for saying that. I don't like exposed concrete. That's just me. But it is an impressive building. And this building came about at a time when there were some serious issues within the AV supply chain. I know the amount of sleepless nights that Sheila and Mo and Lloyd and Chris and Dan have had, right? So a huge shout out to them for getting it delivered on time. This has been a monumental effort by them. What else are we doing? So one of the biggest is a softer part, right? But I'm working on creating a culture change within the team. If you think about AV support historically, it's about a physical person physically walking around campus, physically going into a space, and physically fixing an issue. Now, if you think about a lecturer, if they have an issue, from the moment they have an issue to somebody walking in, could be 15 minutes, could be 20 minutes. And this is a class full of students who are paid anything from 9,000 to 20,000 pounds a year to just come and study at our institution. So it just doesn't seem sustainable. So we want to do something a bit more different. We want to introduce the remote first approach. So the last few weeks, we are sort of experimenting a bit with, creating a rota-based system where a couple of people will be remote first. The idea is they are desk bound. They look at all the tools that are available to us, try and find those issues proactively and fix them remotely if they can. If they can't, get an engineer on the case straight away so we can try and reduce the downtime in lecture theaters. The second thing we are working on is investigating that single pane of glass, that one tool that rules them all, right? Because we all know, right? If you look in a rack, there's so many different technologies. We've got Sennheiser speakers here, we've got Bluestream, we've got this, we've got that. And all of them come with their own management suites. We want that one tool that essentially gives us a single pane of glass. So we have been doing some proof of concept with Utilology. I think it finishes next month. Seems quite promising. It can do things like automated room checks along with monitoring as well. So that's quite useful for us. But the tool on its own is not enough. But you need to combine the tool with the culture change. Those two things combined together is what's going to bring the difference. If you just implement one or the other, it's going to fall. You need both of them to work together effectively. So that's what we are working on. Then obviously investigating innovative technologies. I mean, there's just so much happening in the AV space, right? We have got camera tracking, we have got AV over IP, we're talking about AV virtualization, AR, VR, AI. There's just so much happening, right? So what we are doing is just figuring out how all these innovations can meaningfully translate into something for our organization. So where are we now? I think we are about 65% there. I think hopefully by March 2027, we will have achieved our vision of what we want to deliver. So I think we are about 65% there. But what can we expect in the sequel in 3 years' time, right? So I will talk about more innovation. The AV space is moving at such a rapid pace right now that what is in fashion right now is going to be old news in 3 years' time, right? It's just moving at such a rapid pace. So we need to continue innovating. We need more collaboration with the states. If I was to visually describe it, I would visually describe it as a cartoon building that looks really derelict and run down. You have two cartoon figures with sort of, hard heads on, walk into the building, crash bang, wall of 5 minutes later, they come out and the building looks absolutely new. That's the vision here, right? Us and our states going in together and coming out with the building fully refreshed. That's what we were trying to achieve. We will continue our journey of trying to create truly interesting spaces. You will see some at UCL East right now, but we want to push that envelope even further. And then we want to provide more proactive, more remote, and more responsive support. The idea is how can we make our teachers and students' time in the space as productive as possible? How can we reduce that downtime? So just finding those efficiencies in our support processes. But why are we doing any of this? Now, I could easily just point it back to the slide that said the last chapter. That's why we are doing it. That still feels quite superficial. If I was to dig really, really deeper as to why we are doing this, for me, it's about playing a very small part in creating that environment that excites and inspires the thought leaders and the problem solvers of tomorrow. I mean, these are students who are going to go out and start working on solving those really big problems like climate change or finding a cure for cancer or dementia, or they're going to be leaders in a government or leaders in a big, large organization. The least we can do for them is to give them that exciting and inspiring learning space. I think that's why we do it. That's the goal here. Thank you. That's it. Any questions? Hi. So we got in a UX consultant who did the basic frames for us. We then did the design in-house. So Emmanuel Taikas, who some of you might know, Manny, he worked with Chris Knapp, and we designed them in-house. Then we brought in Lucid Partnerships to do the underlying code with C# and HTML5 and design the drivers for us. But it was sort of a combination of three parties: the UX consultant, our internal resources, and Lucid Partnerships. Yes. Sorry? No. So now, when we do the integrations, it literally, this is the code, this is the UI, that's what you're going to apply. Yeah, so it's pretty much configuration based now rather than having to do individual coding now. Thank you. Did you involve end users? Yeah, so Sheila was just pointing that out to me actually. So yeah, we did go and engage with academics. We engaged with our accessibility team quite heavily, just to make sure that we were covering all angles. We actually had a few workshops. We brought them in. We got their feedback. We then tweaked it more. So yeah, absolutely. They were involved all the way through. We were going to get this one chance to do this, right? We had to do it right. So it didn't make sense not to involve them. No question. Thank you very much.
You've got a spare hand.
There you go. Thank you so much.